Hello? Oh my goodness, I've been talking and no one's heard me.
Oh.
Hello? I hope you all hear me. I'm so sorry. I've just been speaking for like 2 minutes and no one heard me at all. So I'll do it again. My name is Marav Fine. I'm here, the program manager at the Jewish Funders Network, and we're really pleased today to have Executive Director Professor Avi Weiss from the Taub Center in Israel, and also Maya Dolgan to speak with us about their new project, the State of the Nation in Israel. So Maya is going to be introducing Avi, and then we will take it away. We'll have questions and answers at the end of the call, or if you want, you can type them into me. Everyone will be muted from my end. If you want to also mute your lines, that will be helpful to make sure that we have as little disruption as possible. And yeah, without further ado, Maya, thank you.
Thanks so much, Marav. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm so sorry. I muted myself before I started to speak.
Not a problem. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Marav, for organizing this talk for us, and thank JFN in general for inviting the Taub Center to share this material with you today. I will briefly introduce the Taub Center and Avi, and then I will pass the microphone, or no microphone in particular, over to him. We're calling in from Jerusalem, Israel, where our offices are. The Taub Center for Social Policy Studies in Israel is Israel's leading social and economic think tank. It's a center that focuses on 5 policy areas: health, education, labor, welfare, and economics. And here at the Taub Center, we believe that good research leads to good policy, which leads to good and a better improved environment for all Israeli citizens. We do research on a number of fields, as I mentioned. We have in-house researchers and senior researchers and policy programs who are top professors who sit at universities around the country, and top leaders in the field, and former and future government leaders as well. And we do research on the topics that I mentioned, and we publish a number of different materials, including our annual State of the Nation report, which is the big report that was put out about a month ago. It has 13 chapters in it, and we put out other reports over the course of the year, including standalone policy briefs and policy papers and short animated video clips and infographics and materials of all different kinds, in order to allow for multiple entry points into the material. The Taub Center's material is completely apolitical and neutral, and that is the most important thing about the center, because then the Taub Center is able to brief policymakers from all sides of the spectrum and other key stakeholders, including civil society leaders, private sector leaders, and of course philanthropists who have a stake in Israel's future as well. So in addition to the talk that Avi is giving today, we'll be happy to do follow up with anyone who is on the call or other people who will be listening in as well to get any more information about the material that Avi is presenting. And everything is also available on our website for free in PDF, and people are welcome to join our mailing list as well. Marav can share my contact information with anyone who is interested, and then I will pass it over to Avi. Professor Avi Weiss is the Executive Director of the Taub Center. He recently joined the Taub Center in following many years of being an economics professor at Bar-Ilan University, where he still teaches as well. He has his doctorate in economics from the University of Chicago and has previously served as well as the chief economist of the Israel Antitrust Authority, among many other roles in the government, including sitting on a number of committees, such as the Trachtenberg Committee and the Bacher Committee. So I will pass it over to Avi, and thank you all very much for participating in the call today.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you, Merav. I assume you can all hear me? Merav, you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I'm muted.
Okay.
So everyone can hear you. Don't worry.
All right. So let's dive straight into it. So what I'm going to be presenting today is a little bit of the material from the book that Maya just mentioned, the one that came out in late December. And it'll basically, because our time is limited, it'll be just a number of chapters out of or taking actually different parts out of the book. And let's just go, and you're all welcome to see the entire book. So this is the State of the Nation book from 2015. So what I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to start with, is talk about poverty in Israel. And it also relates to an issue of inequality, but I'll just show you the poverty situation. And what I call this is basically a tale of two different countries, or two different stories. And let's take a look at the share of people below the poverty line. So if we take a look at the share of people below the poverty line, Israel actually doesn't look that bad. It looks very similar to a lot of other countries. You can see that where Israel is to 28% below the poverty line. The U.S. is at 28% also. The OECD average is about 29%. And that actually looks fairly decent. However, that's talking about market income. Now, market income means, what you're getting in your paycheck before they take off taxes. It's your gross income, and not talking about your net income after taking off taxes. And the other thing that it doesn't include in it is it doesn't include any kind of transfer payments, any type of Social Security payments that you get in, any type of welfare payments that you're going to get, any help with health expenditures, et cetera, et cetera. That's not in there. So this is what a lot of countries do. A lot of countries intervene in their population's income and basically redistribute income. They take taxes and they use those taxes in order to try to help the less wealthy. And let's take a look what happens when we do that. So when we do that, we get a different story. Israel here has 21% of, this is called disposable income, 21% below the poverty line. It's actually the highest poverty percentage of any of the countries in the OECD. You see the United States is down at 17%. And in fact, what seems to be happening is that Israel's not doing as good a job in evening things out as is being done in these other countries. And the question is, why is that happening? So part of the reason that is happening, I will show you now, is that there is in general a relationship between tax revenues and public expenditure. And the more you can take in tax revenues, the more you can spend on trying to even things out. Now let's think of this in U.S. terms. Let's think of this as Democrats versus Republicans. In the following sense, we know that if you go back to the basics of what the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is, that the Democratic Party believes in bigger government, believes in more intervention in the market, and trying to for government to take a more active role, while the Republican Party seems to be more in favor in general of staying out of the people's pockets as much as possible, take less, and do less. And it's a question of where you are. Now here is a graph that shows you public expenditure here on the y-axis, that's here, and on the x-axis you have the tax revenue. So this is showing you something very, very basic. The more tax you take, the higher the percentage of taxes you take, well, the more you can spend. So you have an extreme case like Denmark all the way up here, which takes an enormously large percentage of income as taxes. Now this isn't talking about what your marginal tax rate is. This is talking about of all the income being generated in the entire country by all the workers, what percentage is leaving their pockets and going into the government's pockets. This is almost half of the income is going into the government's pockets, and then it's able to spend a lot of money in order to be able to try to move things around. Israel has chosen to be located on the bottom, on the low end of this. You're going to see that Israel, well, it's not quite as low as the U.S. The U.S. is an outlier in very many ways, but Israel is right along the line. They're right where they should be pretty much, but they've chosen, relative to these other OECD countries, they've chosen to take less in taxes, and therefore they're able to spend less on trying to alleviate the problems. When I talked about 48% in Denmark, in Israel it's about 29%, which is actually surprisingly low. The way that this happens is that they're taking very little taxes from the low-income earners, and then the taxes go up very, very fast at the end. So let's take a look a little bit more. So here's the tax burden in different countries. Now you see the OECD countries here up on top, and the OECD average is over here. The U.S., you can see, is on the bottom. The tax rates are very, very low in the U.S. relative to most of the other countries. Now here's Israel. Israel is moving along with the OECD, and then it drops. In 2007, there was a decision to lower the tax rates on the Israeli public. And as a result, Israel's tax income went down significantly. The idea, of course, was to try to get people more involved in the economy. And this, you can, I guess in the U.S. they once called this Reaganomics to some extent. It's a very, very similar type of thinking, that they're trying to lower the amount being taken, but that means they're going to have less money to spend. So what I'm going to do now is show you a little bit about expenditures and what's been going on. So let's stick first of all with the tax cuts. Sorry, I forgot about this slide. But if you take a look at who has been helped by the tax changes, well, the decile, the people who've been helped more by the tax changes, are these people down here, the first decile. They actually have, there was a big negative income tax rule that was passed, and they've actually benefited most from the changes in the tax laws. But the ones who have benefited the next most are the highest decile, the richest people. Now the reason the richest people are the ones who are benefiting the most is that what was cut, it was income taxes that were cut. And when income taxes are cut, then the people who are paying most of the income taxes are the ones who are going to benefit the most. These guys down here, 2, 3, and 4, the second, third, and fourth deciles, well, they're not getting very much benefit because they're pretty much not paying any income taxes at all. So therefore, the cuts in the income taxes don't really help them. So that's what's going on and who's being helped for the tax cuts. Moving over to the expenditure side, let's take a look at different expenditures. So welfare expenditures, Social Security and social welfare, have been, well, they went down for a little while, but they've been going up for quite a period of time. This is in constant prices. This is not, there's no inflation in here. It's just in real terms they've been going up, the amount being spent. If we take a look at the percentage of government expenditures, they've been fairly flat for a very long period. For the past at least 10 years, they've been fairly flat. If we take a look at subcategories, then we can see that, and these are the two that I want to show you. The expenditure on old age, on the elderly, has been going up. They've been spending a lot more on the elderly. But there's a big cut in child allowances, and that happened in 2003. Now, this was a decision by the government to try to get the Haredi population in particular out into the workforce. And the Haredi population got a lot of payments, since they have large families. They got a lot of payments in child allowances that were very, very high. And the decision was that in order to try to get them into the workforce, we cut those. And they cut them really, really drastically. And as a result, a lot of families, a lot of Haredi families, started going out to the workforce and stopped going to the yeshivot, a lot of the men. So that was a decision that was made by the government back in 2003. Let's move on. If you take a look at the number of people that are being supported, Israel has a lot of children, but look what's happening to the elderly. The number of elderly is going up just like the number of children, and in percentage terms, since they're starting from a lower base, it's even much more significant. Israel is getting older, and I guess it's happening all over the world, but it's been very, very substantial in Israel. But Israel also has a very, very large number of children, a lot larger than you find in any other OECD country. The average Israeli family has 3 children, and if you take a look at most OECD families, they're around 2 and below, 1 to 2, and they're not even replicating themselves. With respect to support for the elderly, there was this spike over here, but aside from that, there's been an increase in the amount that's being spent for the elderly, how much is being given to each elderly person in each month. And moving over to healthcare, if we take a look at healthcare, well, the OECD and the U.S. are very different. Of course, the U.S. is changing. This is only until 2010. If you take a look at the U.S. now, well, given Obamacare and everything else, these numbers have changed significantly for the U.S. But in general, the OECD has been given, the European countries have been giving much more support to healthcare, much more expenditure has been put on healthcare by the government. In the U.S., the government tends to stay out of it more, and people are paying for their own healthcare. Israel has been moving down. Now, this move downwards is very, very interesting. And it's not happening because of what you might think. It's not happening because the government is spending less. It's happening because people are spending more. And what's happening is that all these insurance companies have come out with a lot of different healthcare insurance plans and are selling people 2, 3, 4, 5 times. They're selling them the same plan over and over again. They're buying plans from different people, from different companies. They don't even realize that they're spending money that is just being wasted because they're covering themselves for the same things from different companies, and there's really no need for it at all. So there's been a lot of unnecessary expenditures by Israelis. So the government's spending about the same thing, but the people are spending more for themselves. Education. Education, of course, is another very, very important expenditure in Israel and every country. I want you to take a look at what's happened over time. In 2000, in millions of shekels, 26 or 27 billion shekel was being spent on education. That went up in 2014 to 43 billion, and that's 1.6% change every year. If you take a look at per student, it's gone up from about 17,000 to 21,000 per student. That should not be in millions, that's a mistake. And if you take a look at the percentage, Israel's actually increased their percentage of their expenditures on education. They've gone from 9% of the budget being for education to 11% of the budget being for education, and that's a really big increase and a really important increase in Israel. The importance of spending on education is not lost on the Israeli government. So now I'm going to break this down a little bit. The story about the poverty, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to take a look not at everybody, but I'm going to take a look at the working ages. Working ages, for our perspective right now, is 15 to 59. That's not because 59 is when people stop working. It's because different countries in the OECD have different ages at which they make you go out to pension, at which you then become eligible for pensions. And therefore, in order to be able to compare across different countries, we limited ourselves to the age of 59. So let's take a look at what happens for those who are working ages. So I'm going to show you the same picture I showed you before. Now Israel here, actually, even if you take a look at market income, has a relatively high percentage below the poverty line. But you know what? It's not all that different for a whole lot of countries here. So there's a real sharing. Everybody's about the same place. But now if you go to disposable income like I did before, well, again, Israel is doing really, really poorly. Israel and the U.S. are very close to each other, but Israel's doing just a little bit worse than the U.S. even. So again, Israel is in last place. This is not really good news. If we divide it up according to population, well, so you take a look at the Haredi population here, has a very, very high percentage of, whether you look at market income or disposable income, a very high percentage below the poverty line. And we know why that's happening. It's happening because the families are choosing to only have the woman go out to work, if anybody at all, and the man is basically sitting and learning in the yeshiva. Not everybody, obviously, but a very high percentage of that. Arab Israelis also have a relatively large percentage. This is actually more the women than the men. Men are working at rates very similar to the Jewish population, but the women are not. The women are working at very, very low rates, similar to the Haredi men. If you take a look at the total population, well, you can again see the differences between market income and disposable income. Obviously, when you're talking about working age, you have a lower percentage below the poverty line than we talked about everybody. This is 2002-2003. Let's take a look what happened. That increased going over to 2005 to 2006. And that increased here by the Haredim in particular because of their loss of the child allowances. This is before they're actually inside the market, but they're actually losing all that income that they had before, and as a result of that, they are actually in large percentages below the poverty line. Moving on to 2010-2011, again, looking at this Haredi population, you see a decrease in the percentage. They are now heading out to the workforce. This is not happening in the other populations. But here there's a large decrease, 5 percentage points. That's a large decrease, and even in disposable income, it's gone down. So that's what's happening for this population. We have more people working, So if we take a look at the number of wage earners in 2003, you can see that a lot of families here, 34.5%, had one wage earner, 28.5% had no wage earners, which means you're left with only 37% with either both members, both the husband and the wife working, or even more, we have one of the children, an older child living at home, also working, or a parent. Let's now take a look what happened in 2011. So the percentage with no wage earners has gone down. Percentage with one wage earner has gone down. Well, where have they gone? They've gone in that now you have more people working. This has gone up with two or more wage earners has gone up, both here and for three or more wage earners. If we take a look at the different population groups, so we have men over here, we have women over here. This is 2002, 2003, and here you see what I was talking about before. Only about 50% of the Haredi men were working in 2002, 2003, and only about 17% of the Arab Israeli women were working in the same year. The Arab Israeli men are working at a rate of 56%. It's below the non-Haredi Jews, but it's still a very, very significant percentage that are going out to the workforce. And for Haredi women, 40.8% were working. It's gone up significantly. Let's take a look at the new numbers. So in the new numbers, you can see that every single population is working more. The Haredi men are working 5% more. The Arab Israeli men are working 4% more. The Haredi women are working a lot more than they were before. And the Arab Israeli women are working a lot more than they were before. So there's been an improvement for all groups. And we're catching up to the OECD. If you take a look in 2002, 2003, so we were well below the OECD, both for men, but also for women. Not as big a gap for women, a much bigger gap for men. But if we now take a look at 2011, then we're seeing that the men have not quite caught up, but they've closed about half of the gap. And the women actually have a higher percentage of participation than in the OECD at this point. Moving over to a different population, I'm now making the population even smaller. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to show you what looks like an anomaly and then explain it to you. And there's a lesson here. The lesson to be learned is that when you see people presenting you statistics and all kinds of graphs, think carefully about what they're showing you. So let's take a look at families with wage earners. So we've now taken our 15 to 59 group, and we're now saying, well, let's get rid of all those who nobody is working, where nobody in the family is working at all those zero-wage families. Let's remove them. So what we see is lots of lines, okay? Don't try to interpret this at all. This is looking over time, and it's basically showing you the poverty rate in different countries. So the U.S. is way up here on the top, okay? It's been high. Ireland is all the way down here. Actually, the lowest, I guess, is Czechoslovakia. The OECD average is somewhere in the middle here. I don't even see it. But we've got everything going on now. I'm going to show you Israel. So here comes Israel. Wow. I mean, that's really very, very startling. Because what you see is that Israel is actually in the middle of the pack, and it's moved way up to the top of the pack. Not a good place you want to be when this is what you're talking about is poverty rate. And the question is, what's going on? This seems weird. And the reason it seems weird is that I just finished telling you about all these additional people who are moving into the workforce. And if all these additional people are moving into the workforce, how come the poverty situation is getting worse? And this is what I was saying about being careful about looking at graphs and statistics in general. There's a good book you should all read called How to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff. I highly recommend it. Bedtime reading, it takes half an hour. So what's going on here is as follows. Think about what's changed over time. What's changed over time is that I've taken, to a large extent, these Haredi men who have absolutely no practical training. They haven't learned math, they haven't learned English, and when they go into the workforce, what they're doing is they're going and they're working in very, very low-paying jobs, menial jobs very often. And as a result, even though they are now earning more than they were earning beforehand, they're still below the poverty line. Now, what's changed? What's changed is that until they came into the workforce, they weren't there at all. Since they weren't there at all, they weren't included as part of the poverty, as in the poverty rate, because they just weren't in the graph. When we added them to the graph, we added them at the bottom of the pile. we added them as being people who are now in the graph, but they're in the graph below the poverty line. So what you're seeing, this increase, looks like a really awful thing that's happening, and what's actually behind it is something that was what was aimed for, something that's very good. That you're now having these additional populations going into the workforce and doing better than they were doing beforehand. Okay, let's take a look at the different groups. So this was the effect of the cuts in child allowances, what I just talked about now. And again, we're talking about households with wage earners. So the Haredim in 2002, 2003 had a very high percentage. It's not as big as it was before, but 49% who are working are still below the poverty line. When you then move over to 2005, 2006, that's gone up significantly, and it's gone up because they're now entering into the workforce, people who weren't there before. It's going up in the other categories, but not nearly as much. And if you take a look at 2010, 2011, well, they're starting to do a little bit better. All right. I'll give you one graph on retirement. Taking a look at the retirement age is 66 and up. So again, this is the same tale of two extremes as before. If you take a look at earned income, well, actually it turns out that a very large percentage of the Israeli people over age of 66 continue to work, and a much larger percentage than in most of the OECD countries. As a result, if you take a look at market income, the percentage below the poverty line is actually relatively low. But if you now take a look at disposable income after everything else going on, then Israel again is doing very, very poorly. And the only countries that are doing worse are Korea, and Switzerland is doing worse, and Australia is doing worse. So that'll finish the issue of poverty. But while we're talking about poverty, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Ethiopians. The reason I want to bring now this is some research that did not appear in the latest book. It was an earlier piece that we did earlier last year. I think it was in June or July that we did this particular piece of research. And this piece of research was sparked as a result. It was reactive to very, very large demonstrations that broke out by the Ethiopian population, basically bemoaning their situation. And the people at the Taub Center decided that this would be a good chance to take a look at what's actually happening. Because what was being done was that a lot of different figures were being thrown out, a lot of statements were being made, but nobody actually had any numbers. And since they didn't have any numbers, people were talking about submission and making things up as they were going along. And therefore, the Taub Center decided that, we can check this. And so they decided to check it. And I call this a tale of two populations. And let's take a look at the two populations. So two populations here are the Ethiopians who came to Israel after the age of 12, and the Ethiopians who came to Israel before the age of 12. The difference being that those who came after the age of 12 came illiterate. They basically got very, very little education. The education they did get was started very, very late, and the ability to catch up was very, very minimal. So therefore, this is a population over here, those who came after the age of 12, who just didn't really have the ability to do very much. And therefore, a very small percentage of them got any kind of high school education. Let's remember, many of them are adults. Therefore, they didn't get any kind of education at all. Those who came at an earlier age, well, they are getting high school education, and they're getting it almost at the same rate as the non-Ethiopian Jews. Still below, but it's actually pretty good. Between 2000 and 2005, take a look at what's happened since then, and there's been a big increase here in the percentage that are getting a high school education, and they're almost caught up to the Israelis. Now, this is really pretty amazing because these are first-generation arrivals, or most second-generation. They're living in homes in which their parents are illiterate, and yet they're actually doing quite well very, very, very quickly. They're getting this high school education. If we take a look at the Bagrut is the matriculation. It basically allows you to then go to college afterwards. But take a look at what percentage is getting a Bagrut. Well, you still see that they're having difficulty. They're doing better than the Arab Israelis are doing, but they're not where the non-Ethiopian Jews are. Okay, so they're still below. They're still having their difficulties getting their Bagrut. If we take a look, we move on, they're improving. So this is actually a really nice success story that the investments that are being made by so many different groups, including the JDC and including the Israeli government and the Israeli Ministry of Education, actually showed a lot of fruits, and has actually been doing quite well. But as I said before, well, let's take a look at the share with BAs. Well, BAs are still only getting about half of what the non-Ethiopian Jews. So the percentage getting a BA is about half of the non-Ethiopian Jews, but they're still doing better than the Arab Israelis, and certainly much better than those who came after the age of 12. Take a look at employment. So the non-Ethiopian Jews are doing much better than the Arab Israelis. That's a given. What's happening? But if you now take a look at the Ethiopians, look at that large rise. The Ethiopian Israelis are actually increasing, and they haven't quite reached an employment rate the same as the non-Ethiopian Jews, but they're getting there. If we take a look at distribution by occupation, well, if you take a look, the orange on the bottom is the percentage that don't work. So the Arab Israelis have a large percentage who aren't working. As we said before, that's very largely, that's women and not men. The non-Ethiopian Jews and the Ethiopian Israelis who are educated in Israel are very, very similar in that regard. Where are they not similar? In the very high-skilled work. In the high-skilled work, the non-Ethiopian Jews, the native Israelis, are doing a much higher percentage of high-skilled work, 33 plus 6%, 39%. And the Ethiopians are not doing nearly as well, probably about 20% of the year. Okay, but let's remember that they're first-generation immigrants who came with parents who aren't educated. Now, if we take a look at, so I've been telling you mostly about the one population, but now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the second population. So the one population of those who came until the age of 12 and were educated in Israel have been catching up fairly nicely. But those who came after the age of 12 haven't been doing as well. Now, what we have here in this graph right here is the percentage who out of that group who are working in very, very menial jobs. The menial jobs are that they're cleaning houses or they're working in kitchens and doing very, very low wage jobs. So the percentage among men, percentages among women, among the different groups are not all that different from each other. But now when we take the Ethiopians who came after the age of 12, what we see is that 50% of the women are working in these very, very menial jobs. Is it surprising? No, it's not surprising. But when you think about the protests that broke out, well, and you take a look at this, well, you now understand where the problems are. So this was very, very important to study because it allowed people to focus on what was working well and what wasn't working well, which is what we try to do here in general. And it was allow people to say, you know what we've invested in, which is the young, which is the education, seems to be working fairly well. We should continue doing that. But where we haven't been perhaps investing enough is trying to help those populations that are very, very weak. And that's where the failure has been. Now, the 70% among men isn't because they're not working. It's because they're working in other types of jobs, and they're also very, very low-paying jobs. For instance, guarding at supermarkets and things along those lines. Okay, so now if we're talking about the work, so another very, very interesting piece of work that was done that appears in this book is looking at the effect of progress and looking at what we call occupations in jeopardy. Now, what's happening is as follows. In any type of advanced economy, things are changing, and things have been changing for a very long time. And the changes have been largely as a result of computerization. And because of this what's been happening with computerization, jobs are disappearing. So I'll give you a few examples. You don't see very many elevator operators anymore. There are a few left in New York, I think, but very, very few. And for instance, let's take a more contemporary example. You don't have as many travel agencies as you used to have. And you don't have them because we all know that you can get onto the internet, you can book by yourself, and what do I need a travel agent for? I pay less if I book by myself, and I find my own deals. And that's what's happened is that the computerization has replaced, to some extent, those types of jobs. You can walk into a supermarket and you can check yourself out. You don't need a cashier anymore when it's working, of course. It doesn't always work. And many different types of jobs. You don't need as many bank houses you used to have. And the point of this study was to take a look at what jobs are disappearing and what aren't, and to take a look at what percentage of jobs we expect to disappear in the next 10 to 20 years, the next decade or two. So if you take a look at Israel, so the high-risk jobs comprise about 39%. Those are the ones we expect to disappear within the next 10 to 20 years. Maybe not disappear completely, but to at least become much smaller than they are. The low-risk jobs, what categorizes the high-risk jobs are things that are repetitive types of actions. You do the same thing over and over again. So a teller at a bank has the same, different things that he has to do in the bank. A checkout person in the supermarket, well, you have to basically pass the food and then collect the money. And these are things that you have to do. It's the same operations over and over and over again. And you see that the things that are high risk are things that are indeed things, data input, think about that. And when you take a look at professions at low risk, well, professions at low risk tend to be the types of occupations that require a personal touch, that require some type of sensitivity to the person who's across from you, that requires you to be very, very, very creative in your work. So that's the choreographer down there. And we have the psychologists, we have the social workers. These are things that aren't going to disappear, not in the near future, maybe in the very far future. What you have in people in medium risk are people, up here you can see me, the economists. So I figure I've got, maybe 20 years left here. And but you see things that are going to be changed over time. How are bus driving going to be disappear? Well, I think about the Google cars and what that's going to do to the industry of drivers, taxi drivers and bus drivers in the not that distant future. Now, lest you think that that's a huge number, 39%, well, it's really not. Here are the numbers for a couple of different countries. Israel here is at 43%. It's different than the previous one. This is 2010, that was 2011. But the U.S. is up at 47%, and Germany is up at 49%. But this isn't a bad thing. This is what progress is all about. Jobs disappear, and new jobs replace them. We don't know what those new jobs are all going to be yet, but they are going to be replaced by different types of jobs than than exist now. So actually, the fact that you have all this turnover is a sign of progress, and I guess it's what we all want, to some extent. What types of jobs are at risk? Well, I think I'm going to go through this quickly because I don't have that much time left. So what you see is in manufacturing and construction, which is a very large part of the pie here, those are very, very important jobs that are going to be disappearing. Many clerks, agents, sales agents, and service agents. Let's go on. Now, the other thing that you see is that you take a look at the likelihood of computerization. The guys down here, those are people who are almost certainly going to be losing their jobs. These are people who are pretty much not going to be losing their jobs. It's pretty certain they're not going to. And what you see is that you take a look at the percentage with a BA or a higher degree. Well, the people who are in danger of being replaced are the people who don't have BAs. People who have BAs tend to not be in nearly as much danger of being replaced. The same is true with respect to the wage that they're earning. The people who are going to be replaced are earning very low average hourly wages, and the people who aren't being replaced have higher hourly wages. It looks the same for all these different groups, for Jewish women, for non-Jewish women, for Jewish men. What are we missing? Well, we're missing the non-Jewish men. The non-Jewish men look very, very different. Take a look at the percentages that are at high risk. 57% are at high risk as opposed to only about 35 to 40% in each of the other groups. Now, why is that happening? Well, that's happening because if you take a look at what types of jobs they're doing, this is Jewish men, and this is non-Jewish men. Now, obviously, what stands out is this blue at the bottom. This is the percentage in manufacturing and in construction, and the percentage among non-Jewish men in construction in particular is incredibly high, and much smaller among Jewish men. So the danger that they face from being replaced by computers is much, much higher. Israel, and this is going to be true of any country, any modern country, in fact, is moving in the right direction. You take a look at those same jobs back about 20 years ago, their percentage that were doing the high-risk jobs was much higher than it is now. Now it's down to 39%. It was about 48%. Where are they moving? Well, they're moving more towards the low-risk jobs, and that's what we expect to happen, and that'll continue happening over the future. To end on a fun note, then I want to talk to you about the quality of life, and to talk to you in particular about longevity. And this is an interesting study from the latest book that shows a very, very surprising finding. And it just comes to show you, or goes to show you, that quality of life, in fact, does depend on more than just income. We all know that anyway. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at three specific cities. The cities are Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, and Beit Shemesh. The reason I choose those cities is because those are the three cities that have the largest percentage of Haredi population. And just to show you what the percentage is, so out of the Haredi population, 35% live in Jerusalem, which is about a third of the entire population of Jerusalem. 22% live in Bnei Brak, which is almost everybody in Bnei Brak. Almost all of Bnei Brak is Haredi. And I personally know the 5% that aren't Haredi. And about 5% of the Haredi population live in Beit Shemesh, which is almost half of the population of Beit Shemesh. Why I'm showing you this, I'll show you in a moment. Now I want you to take a look at this graph over here. What this graph over here shows you is it shows you the socioeconomic index and the life expectancy over here. It's taking all these municipalities with 50,000 or more residents and basically just plotting out what their socioeconomic index is on average and what the life expectancy of the average person there is. And as you can see, there's a real, strong correlation between the two. There's one is affects the other. I don't know which direction, but one affects the other. And what you can see is that the higher your socioeconomic index, the better off you are, the more income you have, the longer people are going to live on average. You guys can if you're going to move here, Ranano looks like a really good place to go. And what you're going to notice is that there are three things missing here. What's missing here is we don't have Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, and Beit Shemesh here. Well, now I'm going to bring in those three cities. Well, surprise. Where are they? They're way above the line. In other words, socioeconomically, they're not doing too well, but they really have much higher life expectancies than the line would have made you believe. And what is going on? Well, here's what's going on. What's going on is that it turns out the Haredi population is really happy with their lives. First of all, from a self-reported health perspective, 73.6% of Haredim report themselves as being very, very healthy. And only 18.7% report that they have any kind of physical problem. Now take a look, the percentage with physical problems is much lower than any other population, and the percentage that feels very good health-wise is much higher than any of the other population. Now this could be that just, they don't want to kvetch, they don't want to complain about how they feel, but maybe there's more behind it. Maybe they really are feeling well. But then the question is, why would they feel so good? Why are they so healthy? It would explain their longevity, but why are they so healthy? And here's part of the explanation, at least. The answer is they're really happy with their lives. They're really satisfied with what they're doing. Now take a look, for instance, satisfaction with family relations. 80% of the Haredi population is very satisfied with their family life, with their married life, and their children. Much lower in the others, about 60 to 65% in the other populations. And a very large percentage of them meet their friends on a daily or almost daily basis. Now, why is that? Well, part of it is that they go to shul 3 times a day. They go to synagogue 3 times a day. And when they go for prayers, they meet their friends. They see the people they like to see, and they sit down and talk to them. 43% of them are volunteering. That's a huge percentage of the elderly volunteering in all kinds of different places, and only 11% feel lonely. Well, they're very, very satisfied with what they have. For those of you who understand Hebrew, mihu asher sameach b'chako, who is rich? The person who's happy with his lot, and they're very happy with their lot. Now, one of the things I said when I saw the study originally was I said to the author of the study, I said, if what you're saying is true and you're trying to explain this by how often they go to synagogue, well, then I would expect to see a difference between men and women, because men are the ones who are going to synagogue 3 times a day, and the women are not. So maybe men are seeing their friends daily or almost daily, and women are not, maybe the men are happier with their lives than the women are. And do we see a difference? And the answer is we do. Now take a look at men. This is Bnei Brak and Jerusalem. I wasn't able to get the data. They weren't able to get the data for all of the cities for the breakdown between men and women. But if you take a look at the same type of line as we had before, and the men are, Bnei Brak and Jerusalem are way above the line as before, you see a difference about 3 to 3.5 years between, how long they should live given their socioeconomic index and how long they are living. So men are living on average in those cities about 80 years. The women, it's also above the line, but it's not as far above the line. Here they have about 83 to 83.5 years when they should be about 81.5. They're about 1.5 years to 2 years above where they should be, or 1.5 years actually on average. Here it's less than they should be. So the men are gaining about 3 years. The women are gaining about 1.5 years. But you shouldn't. The women out there shouldn't be jealous of the men gaining more because of course women are living until an average age of 83, and the men are only living until an average age of 80. But I think that the bottom line here, if you've been paying attention to the entire story, is that Haredi seem to be living longer than we would have expected by the socioeconomic index. That it's very, very important to look at issues other than income or socioeconomic index when trying to understand longevity. And I think finally, that the best situation is that you probably live the longest if you are a Haredi woman living in Ra'anana. And thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Avi. It was very exhaustive. I learned so much just listening to all of that I had never known before. So I'm unmuting all the folks on the call. We have a couple minutes left over to ask questions. I'm sure, I would imagine you have some questions, those of you who are on the call, about some of the many statistics and facts that Avi just gave us. We are recording this call, so we'll be sending out the recording that'll have the slides and all of that. So feel free to either ask or type questions in. I'll be quiet for a minute or two to let you guys decide if you want to do that.
Meirav, let me just remind everyone that all of our publications are free and are online. So you can actually go into our website and download the entire book or any studies that we have throughout the history of the Taub Center.
Wonderful. Thank you, Avi.
And I'll remind again everyone that if you're interested in getting more information, if you have follow-up questions after the talk is over, please feel free to be in touch with me as well.
We have one question about policy implications, like not necessarily the data specifically, but what are some of the policy implications of the information that you've just shared with us?
Well, there was a lot of information. Would you want to narrow it down to any specific subject, or?
I don't know. That wasn't my question. It came from someone typing it in. So if you'd like to, person who typed that question to me, if you want to give me something more specific, otherwise. Oh, he says you pick.
While he's doing that, let me tell you that
you pick. What do you think the most important policy implications are? He'd like to know.
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I guess some of the important policy implications obviously deal with the first issue that I was talking about with respect to the poverty rates in Israel and income inequality in Israel. And we know that a lot of it is being driven by the two specific populations that are not out in the workforce. And a lot of work is being done in trying to address that issue and trying to get them more out to the workforce. And that's very, very important, whether it deals with education issues with respect to the Haredi population, whether it deals with transportation problems that Arab women have. All those things are things that can and need to be addressed. Now they are addressed, but they need to be moved along and continue to be moved along and improved over time. So we see improvement. We see more Haredi men going out to work. We see more Arab women going out to work. The direction is right, but we need to just get a lot more of that going. I think the policy implications in those issues are very, very clear.
I'll jump in here as well and add to what Avi was saying. They're specifically looking at the studies that Avi presented. Another area where we have seen that there is possibility for policy implications coming out of this work has to do with the study that Avi presented, the second to last one, about occupations at risk of computerization. So after the Taub Center publishes its reports, we then have a pretty targeted campaign to reach out to policymakers and to speak to members of Knesset, government ministries, the Prime Minister's office, President's office, local municipalities, anyone who has any questions, anyone who'd like to consult, and anyone who'd like to use this material to inform the decisions that they make afterwards as well. And so a particularly relevant example at the moment, as we mentioned, this book was published about a month ago, so we're still at the beginning of the process of seeing how this work is relevant in this particular Knesset. There's a member of Knesset named Aliza Lavi from the Yesh Atid party who read this material about occupations at risk and met with the researcher and with Avi a few days after the book was published and asked many questions and is using this material to put together initiatives in the Knesset that she's hoping to put forward having to do with job training programs and how the government can be more focused in the way that they can help to ensure that there will be employment opportunities available to those whose jobs are going to be replaced. And next week there is a day at the Knesset that she has organized that she's calling Employment Day, in which Taub Center researchers will be presenting at a number of different committees on the different areas that are relevant to employment and the future of the labor market. So that's one example.
I would also say from the Jewish Funders Network perspective, we have a peer network that's committed to workforce development, and we actually just had a conference for funders of Haredi workforce development just last month. So we also have a lot of funders who are very interested in this and in understanding this better. I also just got another comment from someone on the line that they are a funder of Haredim in higher education, and they've been told that most Haredim are in a wait and see to see if indeed Haredim getting college degrees and getting work with decent incomes, and if they remain Haredim, which is an interesting note.
Well, let me tell you that we are actually doing a new study now. We've just gotten a new database, which actually we are the only ones getting it, which puts together a lot of different databases from many, many different sources. And we are going to be able to follow the Haredi population and non-Haredi population for comparison in order to see what's happened to them over time. We will be following the same individuals over a very, very long period. We will be able to see what types of schools they went. We'll be able to see what types of grades they got. We'll be able to see what they went and studied if they went to college. We'll be able to see what types of jobs they went out and got. And we're going to be able to see what works and what doesn't work. It's going to give us an ability to take a look that hasn't been taken until now, the ability to take a really micro look at what's working and what's not working and how important it is. But I think he's right. I think there is a wait-and-see situation. I think some of it also deals with some of the new changes in the laws with respect to bringing child allowances back, which could have an effect also.
I'll just add to that the study that Avi was just speaking about, which is just starting to get underway really within the last few days, which is very exciting, is being conducted by a researcher who has been conducting research about the Haredi population for a few years now. And he actually, the Accelerate conference that you just mentioned, Meirav, he actually gave the pre-conference breakfast webinar for people who were participating in that one, in which he gave a background overview of the education and employment trends in the Haredi sector. So if anyone is interested in seeing that webinar, Meirav, I'm sure that you guys have it up on your, in your JFN database of previous webinars, and we have a link to it as well, which they sent us after he gave that presentation. So if that would be helpful to whoever asked that question, please go ahead and pass it along to them.
Yeah, for sure.
If there are no more questions, I actually would like to go back to that first question. Something I didn't talk about at all during this presentation, we have a number of chapters that deal with the issue of prices in Israel and productivity, which means how much people are able to produce in Israel, the value of what's being produced, and showing some very, very significant difficulties there. And in fact, we're having on Monday, the OECD is coming out with their biannual report on Israel, and they're going to be talking about these issues, and they've asked us to present their findings through the Taub Center. So we're actually going to be hosting a joint seminar on Monday morning. And the thing is, if I were to go back to the question that was asked about the most important implications from the studies that we did, I think one of the most important implications deals with the importance of freeing up imports into Israel, and taking down barriers from trade. And I think that if you're able to do that, you're able to have a very, very large effect on the Israeli economy in general, and certainly on Israeli consumers. So that's another very, very important lesson that we learned from the studies in this book. Not that we didn't know it, but it strengthened it to a very significant degree.
Thank you, Avi. I think we don't have any more questions right now, but certainly I will send out the follow-up information along with the recording of this, so that if you do come up with any questions, you can absolutely reach out to Maya or take a look back at some of these slides. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. This was really great. Thank you so much, Avi and Maya. We learned so much from this presentation. We look forward to seeing everything in full as we all, I'm sure, will go and explore the website. Everyone have a great afternoon, or if you're in Israel, good evening, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks so much, Merav.
Thank you, Merav.
Bye, all.
Bye.